Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today, we have a big show. We will be breaking down the upset from last night between Florida State and Boston College, as Florida State is served their second loss in just technically 1 week of football. We'll talk about that. We'll also get to the AP Top 25 that dropped at around 2 o'clock today. Talk about where everybody falls on there, if I agree or disagree with their list. Also today, we are doing our official NFL playoff predictions. That is for both the AFC and the NFC. We'll get a little bit of a Super Bowl prediction in there as well. And then, of course, the big news coming out of football, Trent Williams, just about 20 minutes ago, signed his contract. We talked a lot about Trent Williams in the last couple of weeks, saying how important he was to this 49ers team for them to be successful. He came back to practice. Now he has a deal. We'll talk about all of that and more throughout our entire show. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate much for sticking around, talking Tuesday afternoon. But like I was saying, we're going to start off our show today with the big upset in college football from last night, as Florida State falls to Boston College, their record down to 0-2. A team that started as the number 10 team in the nation now has just a 1% chance to make the new 12-team college football playoff. They lose 28-13 in blowout fashion, a game where Boston College really just controlled the entire time. When we talked about Florida State last week, their game against Georgia Tech out there in Ireland, we talked about how they got killed in the run game, destroyed on both sides of the line, offensive line, defensive line, and the same exact thing happened again. Florida State got killed in the run game. We'll start with that. Boston College, 270 rushing yards. That is insane. That is not a normal amount of rushing yards. You're not supposed to just be able to show up to somebody else's house and rush it down their throats for 270 yards. And it came from everywhere. Their quarterback, which really has been the Achilles heel for this Florida State defense, is that rushing quarterback position. Two running backs. They ran for a combined 270 yards, and that is unacceptable for a team that's supposed to have a really good run defense. Again, it starts at the front. Then, offensively, you let DJ Uiagalelei get under immense pressure, and he is a guy that, as we've seen, struggles under pressure. He threw one of the ugliest interceptions I have ever seen, missed a whole bunch of wide open receivers, and practically sealed the game with a near pick six on a time that it just didn't really make sense, and we'll get to that in a second. But the big takeaway from this game is Florida State is all but eliminated. Who would have guessed that just after week one, Florida State is 0-2. Florida State is out of the race for the playoffs. That is not something people expected. I know, me personally, I thought Florida State, after missing out on the playoffs last year, they did lose a bunch of pieces, but they reloaded in the transfer portal. That's what they did last year to get to that 13-0. They had a little bit of a chip on their shoulder that would push them forward, but instead, they come in as the biggest disappointment of the season so far. And I know there's a lot more season, and technically if they run the table, I still think there's a way for them to get in, especially in the ACC. They have a couple more big games left. Now, they lose one more game, they're out. A lot of people are saying that they're already out of the playoff hunt. And I'd say, yeah, probably. Like we said, the ESPN prediction model says that they only have a 1% chance to make the playoffs. That's not a good shot. I'm not giving them a lot of confidence to make the playoffs, but they run the table. They have to get through teams like Clemson. They have to get through Miami, who looked really, really good last week. They have to get through Notre Dame, who Miami and Notre Dame arguably looked like the two best teams outside of Georgia in week one. If they beat those three teams and they run their schedule. They're going up against Memphis in their next game. That's a team that a lot of people are predicting to be that group of 5 representative. That's a lot of that's a lot of big games. Now, that's a big if for them to run the schedule. And I don't think for them to run the gauntlet, I don't think they're going to do it. I think they're basically out. But for people saying they're already eliminated, they've got about half a leg to stand on right now. The ACC could still cannibalize itself. There is a path for them to get in. As far as an at-large bid, they're out on that. But technically, even though they're 0-2 in the ACC, there's still a shot. But getting back to the game here, Boston College comes out, and they have Bill O'Brien as a head coach, first-year head coach with Boston College, former head coach of the Texans down there in Houston. He leads this team in a very NFL-style way, and we saw that especially at the end. They didn't run up the score. They didn't take up their starters. They took a knee, lost a bunch of yards, taking the total rushing down to 263. But again, they dominated up front. They had 270 rushing yards. Ridiculous. Outside of that, their defense played just amazing football. In the first quarter, Florida State finished with 4 total yards. Now, a lot of that has to do with them only holding the ball for 50 seconds in that quarter. And again, that gives a lot of credit to the offense. They knew what they were doing. They wanted to get Florida State into a bind. That time of possession is a huge, huge deal. They end up finishing the game with so much more time of possession than Florida State, 40 minutes to 20 minutes. They held the ball basically 2/3 of the entire game. It was a masterclass for them defensively. They really showed up on the scene and said, hey, we're here this season. We are ready to show the ACC we're a threat. Now, Boston College, for as much good as they did, there was a lot of bad on the Florida State side. And again, I talked about how the coaching just wasn't there for Florida State when they were over in Ireland. There's a lot of the same takeaways. Now, instead of using their timeouts too late in this one, they used their timeouts too early. Also, on that interception that I talked about, they were coming out of halftime. It was 14-6. They started with the ball. It's 4th and 6 at about the 50-yard line, right? It's a one-possession game. 13 minutes left in the third quarter. You're not in desperation mode. You don't need to go for it in that situation. You punt, usually, in that situation. But instead, Mike Norvell says we're going to go for it. And we're having a much different discussion about this play if it goes any other way than really what was the momentum shifter. Once this play went off, it felt like Florida State was done because DJU held on to the ball for way too long, took too long to get through his reads, pressure got to him, and he just chucked a ball up to a triangle of Boston College defenders. Boston College picks it off, takes it all the way down to about the 7-yard line, and then they punch it in 1 or 2 plays later. That is, for all intensive purposes, a 14-point swing right there. You know, the defense had just come off a bunch of good stops. The offense had just led a huge drive down the field before halftime, one where they definitely should have scored a touchdown. DJ Uyunglele was leading a masterclass of a drive until they got to the red zone, where he missed not 2, but 3 pretty open guys. One of them was wide open, not a defender in sight. Just a bad throw. It got to the point where Florida State was chanting for the backup quarterback to come in once Boston College scored a touchdown. That's not the spot you want to be. Mike Norvell is absolutely on the hot seat. It feels like there's a chance he won't even survive the whole season. Now, he got in a lot of people's good graces in Florida State by going 13-0 last year with that Jordan Travis-led team. But before that, when he was taking over for Jimbo Fisher, it wasn't really a really successful run. You go back and look at the past teams at Florida State that have started 0-2. Mike Norvell, in his 5-year, 6-year, 7-year tenure, has had 3 or 4 of those teams. He has not had a very successful run at Florida State, a team that prides itself on its football program, right? This is a team that has a very good football history, and yet look at where they are now. They came up with all these expectations, and now they're just the third team in the modern era to start off 0-2 as a top 10 opponent, losing to two non-ranked opponents. Because of that, they fall out of the top 25, and it's going to be really hard for them to get back in. It was just an abysmal performance on all ends. They need to play with more effort, with more energy, and it needs to come from the coaching staff. It came up on the broadcast a lot, but there isn't one guy on this team that seems to be taking a leadership role, that seems to be taking, hey, guys, we need to get in gear. We can't be losing this game. A player like that, right? They don't seem to have that kind of player leadership, and they need to find that if they have any chance. Again, they're all but dead in the water right now. They need to run the table. They need to get a bunch of things to fall their way. But if they can flip the switch right now, they might still have a chance. I'm not too optimistic about them. They got blown out by Boston College, and I think this is a bigger referendum on Florida State than it is Boston College, Georgia Tech, who Georgia Tech slides into the top 25. Again, we'll break down the entirety of that top 25 later on. But let me know your thoughts on this game. I think it's just really disappointing how Florida State has come out so flat this season. We'll see if they can rebound, at least make it a respectable season, try and make a bowl game. That should be their goal now. But we're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to start our NFL season predictions. We're going to start off in the NFC, go through all 7 playoff teams, a little bit of some playoff matchups, and of course, we're going to predict which team is going to come out of the NFC. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make it every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement. The top is so vacant. I don't need shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crowd. Getting my way into be put down. It ain't your place. I'll miss my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it. The losing fits. I'm losing shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live. I choose to dip. You choose to fight. I lose your grip and lose your gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just went over the abysmal performance of Florida State in their blowout loss to ACC opponent Boston College. They fall to 0-2 on the year, all but killing their hopes on making the brand new 12-team college football playoff. But in this segment, we are going to transition over to the NFL, as the NFL is just 2 days away. That's right. Thursday, we have our kickoff game between the Ravens and the Chiefs. I could not be more excited. We are doing our official playoff predictions. We've went through all 32 NFL teams, but now that we know their record, now that we know their offseason, we need to know who's going to make the playoffs, and more importantly, who's going to advance out of their respective playoff brackets. We're going to answer those questions here in just a second, but before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. But like I was saying, we are going to take a look at the NFC playoff picture. Like I said in the intro, we have gone through all 32 NFL teams. Now it's time we get to the actual playoffs. We've been putting it off for long enough. Football is right around the corner, and I have a list for you. We went through all the divisions, so we're going to start off with the division winners, right? In the NFC East, it's a tight race. It's a two-team race, in my opinion, and I don't think people are going to have that much of an issue with that. You have the Giants, Commanders, Cowboys, and Eagles, right? 4 teams in the NFC East. The NFC East is a division that famously, since 2004, I believe, has not had a repeat champion. And the team that won last year was the Dallas Cowboys. Now, there's been a bunch of back and forth in recent memory between the Cowboys and the Eagles. One of these two teams got worse. One of these two teams got better. Now, throwing out of contention the bottom 2 teams, the Giants are just a mess. Daniel Jones is not the quarterback answer, although this is basically a contract year, and last time he had a contract year and Brian Daboll was doing play calling, the Giants ended up winning a playoff game. But the Commanders also have some promise with rookie Jaden Daniels. They're not quite there. This is a 2-horse race between the Eagles and the Cowboys, and I think the Eagles adding Saquon is going to be enough to push them over the top. The Eagles are going to take this division. They're going to settle into the 3 seed for me. Next division on the list here, we have the NFC South. The Falcons, the Bucs, the Saints, and the Panthers. And I think clearly the Falcons are the best team. The Panthers are going to be pretty bad this year, although I do think this is a make it or break it year for Bryce Young. The Saints have their own issues. They're kind of a team that's mid, to say the least, right? And the Bucs are going to be up and down, and Baker Mayfield isn't a quarterback that I trust to have prolonged success. He's a guy that I think was worth paying, but as far as being better than a Falcons team this year that has added so much on both the offensive and the defensive ends to really, really improve their team, I think the Falcons are just going to do enough to secure this division over the Buccaneers, and they're going to slide into the 4 seed. Then, the NFC North, and this is one of the most interesting divisions. In a really realistic scenario, I think we could have 3 NFC North teams make the playoffs. The Bears, the Packers, the Lions, probably not the Vikings, but these are all really, really quality teams. The Bears with Caleb Williams, this is the first real quarterback in Bears history. He looks really good in the preseason. Again, we're going to try not to read too much into that, but it's hard not to when you have a guy like Caleb Williams with so much talent, kind of just flashing it for everyone to see. The Packers give Jordan Love a huge contract. Absolutely worth it, based on the back half of his season. And the Lions just continue to be the Lions, at least from last season. Dan Campbell is running a nice operation over there. I have the Lions winning this division and sliding into the 2 seed, which means the San Francisco 49ers are going to be the 1 seed once again. The San Francisco 49ers have brought back all the pieces they need to. They pay Brandon Ayuk. They pay Trent Williams. That was the last holdout. That was the biggest question. That news broke about 30 minutes ago at this point. The 49ers are going to be really good once again. The 49ers get the 1 seed. And now we get into a little bit more of a question. Who gets the wild card spots? I've laid out a lot of talk about these teams. Obviously, the NFC East is a 2-horse race. The NFC North has the potential for 3 teams. The NFC West has a lot of contenders depending on what breaks they get to go their way with the Rams, the Seahawks. Even the Cardinals, I think, could have a dark horse shot at the playoffs if Kyler Murray is able to go off. But getting to these wild card spots, in the 7 spot, I have the Los Angeles Rams. The Los Angeles Rams are healthy. I know that it's a little bit of a setback losing Aaron Donald, maybe a little more than a little bit of a setback, but their defense should be able to recover, fix it by committee rather than one person. It got a lot better defensively. They have Cooper Kupp for the season. Their offense is healthy. More importantly, Matthew Stafford's arm is healthy this year. That should push them into the playoffs, which they were able to make last year. At 6, I have the Packers. I believe in Jordan Love. Jordan Love got paid $55 million a year for a reason. They have all the weapons they could want. They added a better pure runner, I think, in Josh Jacobs, although They do lose a little bit in that pass catching area, but this is still a very good Packers team, a very good Packers defense. They're going to slide into that 6th seed. And then the Cowboys get that final playoff seed, the fifth overall seed in the NFC. The Cowboys make the playoffs once again. This kind of feels like a last hurrah for them, at least for me personally, when I'm taking a look at this Cowboys team. I don't expect Dak Prescott to be back based on the comments that he's been making, although that's a discussion for another day. We have to make it through the rest of this playoff bracket. But this is their last hurrah. They got a little worse offensively. They bring back Zeke. Remember old times. This is a team that's going to be a little more desperate, I think. But with that being said, we have our bye. The San Francisco 49ers have the 1 seed. They get a bye, which sets up a Lions-Rams rematch in the playoffs. We'll see what happens week 1 between them, but I don't really expect that one to go any differently than the year before. We also get another rematch between the Eagles and the Packers. This time, the Eagles are hosting. Or excuse me, not a rematch. This is going to be a rematch of week 1. The Eagles play the Eagles play the Packers. I think the Packers are going to take this one. I think it's a different situation than the game on Friday night, which we'll do predictions for later on in the week. But the Packers make it past the first round once again with Jordan Love. And then we have a Falcons-Cowboys matchup. And as much as I want to pick the Cowboys, I think the Falcons are going to be a little bit too much for them. They win that game at home, which sets up Packers, 49ers, Lions, Falcons. Fun matchup there in the NFC semifinals. It's going to be a rematch once again. The Lions take on the 49ers, and I think this year is the Lions' year. I think they got a little bit worse in the wide receiver room, but they definitely improved their biggest weakness, which was especially the secondary defensively. Their pass rush got a lot better down the stretch of the year. They still have a really, really good offensive line, really good running back room. Amon-Ra St. Brown is still there. Again, you have Aiden Hutchinson. He is a sneaky defensive player of the year candidate. They drafted 2 rookie cornerbacks. I really like both of them. They could come in and have an immediate impact. I think it's going to push them over the top this year. I think the Lions make the Super Bowl out of the NFC. Now, 49ers very much are a juggernaut. They're built much the same that they were last year. Not too much change. They kept their own guys. They had a very noisy offseason. But when it comes down to it, I think I'm taking Jared Goff over Brock Purdy behind these two teams. And we'll see what ends up happening. Obviously, this is just a hypothetical here, but I'm taking the Lions out of the NFC to make the playoffs. But let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the NFC playoffs, who you have coming out of the NFC and representing them. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to take a look at the AFC playoffs, talk about which 7 teams are representing the AFC and which one of those will make the Super Bowl to take on the Detroit Lions. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we've just gone over the NFC Playoff Predictions. We had the Lions coming out of the AFC, the 49ers getting the 1 seed in the conference, and the wild cards being the Rams, Packers, and Cowboys, although that last wild card spot is up for contention between the Bears and the Rams, I think. In the AFC, it's a much different story. I think you need a base of 10 wins to get in the AFC. We've talked a little bit about how stacked the AFC, but the AFC is, but we'll talk about which of those teams made that 10-win threshold in just a second. Before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I appreciate anything you guys do have to say. I appreciate everybody sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to continue our NFL playoff preview, talking a little bit about the AFC playoff predictions. The AFC is, again, I think just a much better conference than the NFC. I don't particularly think it's close. You have the Chiefs, who have won back-to-back Super Bowls. It's just much more competitive as well. The top quarterback play in general is all in the AFC. You go through a list, I think, outside of, potentially Jalen Hurts, there's not another NFC quarterback that you would put in the top 5 of the league. The rest would be AFC. It's just a much better league. You go down the list of the 16 AFC teams outside of the Patriots, Titans. I mean, maybe Patriots, Titans, Broncos, Raiders. You could potentially see all the other teams making the playoffs. Maybe not the Chargers, but there's a bigger majority of teams that you could see making the playoffs in the AFC, at least in my opinion, than in the NFC. So taking a look at those division winners, it's going to be tight. For all the divisions outside of the AFC West, I think it's going to be an interesting battle. I have the Chiefs taking the AFC West, the back-to-back defending Super Bowl champions, looking to get the first ever three-peat in the Super Bowl era. The Chiefs are on a path to the playoffs pretty easily. The Broncos, the Raiders, the Chargers, for as much change as those teams are going through, I don't think they're going to be able to put up much of a fight against the Chiefs, and they'll be able to slide into the playoffs pretty easily. I have them grabbing the 2 seed this year. Every other division is up for grabs. In the AFC East, outside of the Patriots, you have 3 playoff contenders in the Jets, Dolphins, and Bills, all of which have been very successful in the past, with the exception of the Jets, who now get Aaron Rodgers to pair with an elite defense. Should be good as long as they can stay healthy. The Jets, I do have winning the division, although I have it very close. The Bills, I have finishing 3rd behind the Dolphins and the Jets. It's a very, very tight division race, right? The Dolphins have an easy schedule in the beginning, one of the toughest schedules at the end. The Jets, I'm riding because of their defense mostly, and the fact that if you go to last season, they finished 7-10 with Zach Wilson at quarterback. You add Aaron Rodgers into that mix, along with better weapons. There's just not much of a downside here. The Jets, I think, are going to be a very, very good team, and I know some people are down on Aaron Rodgers, but the Jets are a team that absolutely should. They don't really have many weaknesses. They should make a playoff run. I have them winning this division. In the AFC South, you have an interesting battle outside of the Titans. Again, either the Jags, the Colts, or the Texans could all win this division. You have the Jaguars, who started 8-3 last year, went through a collapse, paid Trevor Lawrence. I think they're 3rd place in this division, but I could see a world where they win this. Then you have the Colts, the Texans. The Texans' case is the most straightforward one. You have C.J. Stroud, Rookie of the Year winner, coming off one of the best rookie quarterback seasons in the history of the NFL. You add in Stephon Diggs to that mix, an improved defense as well. It's going to be tough to beat this team. All the pieces should be lining into place. But the Colts are a team that if they had won on the last week of the season, which they were one dropped pass away from doing so, would have been the representative in that playoffs. And they have a big upgrade at quarterback, at least in my opinion. Anthony Richardson comes in, and he is the biggest question of the NFL season for me. Maybe not the biggest question of the NFL season for everyone, but he is one of the bigger questions. Is he going to be that guy that everyone looks at his tools and says, yep, he's the next great quarterback? Or is he going to not be able to live up to his name, be more inaccurate? The flaws that we saw of him in his college games, he's very inexperienced. This one comes down, I believe, to the Texans versus the Colts. Both of these teams, I think, could win this division. I'm leaning towards the Texans. They're a safer pick, but there is a world here where Anthony Richardson goes off and wins the division. We'll get to the wild card stuff in a second, but I think there's a lot of really good teams in the AFC in this division. The Texans win this one. And the last division to go over is maybe the most interesting, the AFC North, with the Ravens, the Bengals, the Browns, the Steelers. All of these teams should be over 500. This is probably the best division in football. It's one with lots of great defenses, MVP candidates at quarterbacks. It's going to be a lot of fun. The Ravens have reigning MVP Lamar Jackson. Add Derrick Henry to that mix, as well as the best weapons he's ever had to pair with an elite defense from last year. Now, I do think the defense is going to take a slight step back, but the offense is going to take a step up, so I think it's going to kind of even itself out. The Bengals get MVP candidate Joe Burrow back. Joe Burrow, as long as he can stay healthy, and hopefully Jamar Chase can come out of his hold and play a couple games for the Bengals this year. This is one of the more talented teams in the entire NFL. We did our power rankings yesterday. The Bengals came in at 5. The Browns, powered by defense, especially by Myles Garrett, the reigning Defensive Player of the Year. He's a guy that could repeat arguably the best defender in the league now that Aaron Donald has retired. It's going to be a tight race, and you can't forget about the Steelers. The Steelers always find a way to go over 500. They still have Mike Tomlin. They still have their quarterback dilemma, but it's an upgrade at quarterback regardless of who they play. I have them finishing 9-8, and that is 4th place in that division. I do have the Ravens winning this division, though, and grabbing the 1 seed. I just think the addition of Derrick Henry is going to be too much, and they won the 1 seed last year. I don't see why they can't repeat again. Not saying Lamar Jackson is going to do what he did last year, but adding Derrick Henry is going to make it a lot easier for them to throw the ball. Maybe it'll make it easier for Derrick Henry to run the ball than it was in Tennessee anyway. But getting to the wild cards here. Through the division winners, I have the Ravens with the 1 seed, the Chiefs with the 2 seed, the Texans with the 3 seed, and the Jets with the 4 seed. When you get to the wild card, again, like I said, I think it's going to take 10 wins to get into this. I have the Bengals finishing 3rd in wins in the AFC behind the Ravens and the Chiefs. They get that 5 seed. 6th is going to go to the Dolphins. They're going to have 11 wins. I think they lose the division in a tiebreaker with the Jets. Because of that, the Dolphins are relegated to the 6th seed instead of the 4 seed, which they would have had if they had won the division. And finally, that 7th seed. We had a tiebreaker. It was between the Browns and the Colts. I had both of them winning 10 games. Based on they didn't have any head-to-head, so then it goes to whoever wins the most games against the AFC. And I'm giving this one to the Colts. They play in an easier division, which is going to make them get that tiebreaker a little bit easier. You know, instead of having to go up against the Ravens and the Bengals twice, they have to go up against the Titans, Jaguars twice, which is a little bit easier than those 2 teams, in my opinion. Because of that, I'm giving the Colts the 7 seed. So it's Ravens 1, Chiefs 2, Texans 3, Jets 4, Bengals 5, Dolphins 6, Colts 7. So the Ravens get the bye here. The Chiefs should destroy the Colts in the first round. The Texans-Dolphins is going to be interesting. It's going to be a warm game regardless, so we're not going to get any of that kind of weather situation. Although I am leaning towards the Dolphins in this one. It's going to be in a dome in Houston. And as good as CJ Stroud and the Texans are, I think their defense isn't quite going to be able to match up with Tyreek Hill and the Dolphins. Then we get the Jets and the Bengals, and this is probably my favorite playoff matchup so far. It's going to be in New York. I think the Jets take care of business in this one. This is going to be a tight game. Aaron Rodgers versus Joe Burrow should be a lot of fun. I'm giving it to the Jets, though. So in the second round, we have the Ravens taking on the Dolphins. The Jets taking on the Chiefs. And I'm leaning towards, again, in Baltimore, I think the Ravens are able to beat the Dolphins. And I'm actually going to give this one to the Jets here. As much as Patrick Mahomes is great, this feels like the kind of team that's built to beat the Chiefs with that defense and a team that can handle the cold weather too. I think if there's going to be a team to do it, it's going to be the Jets, and I think they take care of them in the second round of the playoffs. Then we have a Jets-Ravens matchup in the AFC Championship game. Giving this one to Lamar and the Ravens, the Jets coming off of a crazy victory against the Chiefs, setting up for a Ravens-Lions Super Bowl. And this one will be a lot of fun. I'm giving the Ravens a Super Bowl. Lamar, not on an MVP year, finally gets his. This should be a fun season. But let me know what you think of the NFL season upcoming. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Who do you have in the Super Bowl? My Super Bowl matchup is the Lions taking on the Ravens, but there's a lot of different combinations there. The Chiefs absolutely could come in and get that three-peat. But let me know what you think. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're getting back into the world of college football. We're going to talk about the AP Top 25 list. It dropped at about 2 o'clock today. We're going to go over their rankings, see if I agree or disagree with where they had a lot of these teams. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we've just gone over the playoff predictions for the NFL. In this segment, we are going to get into the AP Top 25 list, but before we do have some breaking news. Breaking news, the Steelers have signed pass rusher Cameron Hayward to a 3-year, $45 million extension. Huge for the Steelers defense. He's been the captain there for a while. Absolutely deserves to get paid. There was a little bit of a contract discussion there while the season was happening, but he gets back there. This longtime Steeler for life, gets a new 3-year, $45 million deal with $16 million fully guaranteed. Congratulations to him. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the AP Top 25. Before we do, though, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with the message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the new AP Week 2 Top 25. We went over our own personal Top 25 list yesterday. shockingly close to what they had, actually. Pretty excited about that. So not too much to disagree on. But of course, at number 1, they have the University of Georgia. Georgia did their thing, shut down a top 15 team in Clemson, who now falls down to 25. Good spot for them. Didn't want to punish them too badly for going up against the number 1 team. Good to see that they stuck in that top 25. At 2, we have Ohio State, another one of those teams, and another one of those teams that was in discussions to be national champion threats. The only other team outside of Georgia to receive any kind of first place votes. They stay at number 2, although right behind them, just tailing them by 60 points in the rankings, is Texas. Texas moves up 1 spot to number 3. They played great. Lights out. They got everything that they wanted in a game that they should have won. They were probably one of the only teams to be able to do that. Another team that was able to do that, though, is Alabama. They moved up 1 spot to number 4 from 5. Of a great success for the first game from Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, starting a new era down there, exactly how you want to. Lots of stars, shutting out your opponent like they should have. At 5, Notre Dame jumps up 2 spots over Ole Miss to get to the number 5 spot from number 7. They beat a top 20 opponent. They beat Texas A&M. Their defense really showed out, doing what they were supposed to do. I'd like to see a little more from the offense, but it was a very quality win, and that's why they get 2 spots. Not too many quality wins this week in college football. At 6, Ole Miss stays put, winning 76-0 against an FCS team. They do what they're supposed to do. They don't move up. At 7, Oregon falls 4 spots. Oregon was a team that I thought had championship potential as well, although they almost lost to Idaho, an FCS school. This is not the look. The production was there. If you just look at the stat sheet, the production was there, but the score, they only win by 10. They were only up by 3 at one point in the fourth quarter. Not a good look for them. They need to do better. They need to turn that production into points, but they stay in the top 10, and they do get the victory. At number 8, Penn State stays put. The offense showed up. I was a little concerned about the offense, which is why I was a little lower on them. They end up getting the win against a solid West Virginia team. They stay put at number 8. I would have moved them up just a little bit because that's one of the few quality wins that happened in week 1, at least over Oregon. Maybe just swap those 2 for now, but this is a good spot for them. They stay in the top 10. Their offense shows up. This is a good look for Penn State this year. At 9, Mizzou. Mizzou jumps into the top 10, and look at that. Mizzou getting some recognition. They win 51-0. It's absolutely... it's one of these teams that just kind of took care of business with the business they were supposed to take care of. Rounding out the top 10, Michigan. And this is the first one that I really disagree with. I understand you don't want to overreact too much to week 1 of college football, right? But they just look kind of sluggish. They're a team that's focused on the ground game. They didn't really get the same kind of production on the ground that they're used to getting. Anthony asks, do you think what needs to happen with Florida State is what happened with Miami, where Kirk Herbstreit called out the incompetence of the previous administration for funding of football? I don't think funding of football is an issue. They really went hard in the transfer portal, and it's an interesting theory there, right? And they built their 13-0 team on the transfer portal, and it worked in their favor. This time, they go out, take the big swings in the transfer portal. Instead of bringing in Jordan Travis, they bring in, DJ Uyunglele. And you can see the difference between those two guys, right? DJU kind of has his confidence shattered, is the takeaway from those first couple games. People are calling for him to be benched already. I don't think it's more of a football funding administration thing as much as it is the scouting that they were able to do and the guys that they went after in the transfer portal just weren't it. And it's not going to work out every year, right? There's transfer portal successes. Louisville, for example, that we'll get to later on in this segment, is a transfer portal successful program, right? At least this season. Florida State last year was a successful transfer portal season. Florida State this year is not. It's not going to work out every single year, and I think that's more the issue. I do also think the coaching staff is the issue, not the administration. Now, if that's what you mean by the administration, Anthony, then absolutely you're right. But I think it's less the funding. I think they're getting plenty of funding for NIL and the transfer portal, but the coaching needs a change, and they didn't recruit the right guys when it comes to the transfer portal. Cam Ward was in the transfer portal. He goes to Miami. Maybe he chooses Miami over Florida State, but that's it's not a good look for their recruiting side of things. Hope that answered your question. At number 11, we have the Utah Utes. Cam Rising came in after a year off of injury, basically, threw for 5 touchdowns. He is back. That's exactly what you're looking for to see. This is a team that always has had an elite defense. They moved to a new conference this year after the Pac-12 dissolves. This is a really, really good look for Utah. They're going to be challenging for that Big 12 crown this year. It should be a lot of fun. At 12, Miami is up 7 spots, and absolutely, I think it's worth it. Miami looked amazing. We just kind of mentioned Cam Ward. Cam Ward was one of my favorite quarterbacks this week to watch. He did his job against a more solid opponent in Florida. I don't want to overreact and say Florida is bad. They play a tough schedule. I think it's more saying that Miami is good than Florida is bad. I don't know why people thought that game was going to be close, if I'm being honest. Florida just, other than the fact that it's an in-state rivalry and it was in the swamp, they didn't have anything going for them that they were better at than Miami. But I still think Florida and Billy Napier can turn this around. They play a brutal schedule. I think this is his last season, but Miami looked really good. They looked really, really good. They run the ACC now, and I think that's without a question. They're up to number 12. At 13 is USC, the highest climber of the week. They're up 10 spots from 23 after taking down LSU on Sunday night. A huge, huge win for them. Miller Moss looked amazing. We talked about that yesterday. Last second touchdown. Everything's going good for them. The defense holding LSU to just 20 points is the biggest factor. And if that defense can hold up, Miller Moss again looked really good. Calm under pressure was the biggest takeaway for me on the offensive side of the ball. That's what you want to see out of your quarterback. He looked really good. At 14 is Tennessee. They demolish Chattanooga. They should have demolished Chattanooga. It's going to be a fun game this week for Tennessee. Tennessee hosting NC State, a top 25 matchup. That should be a lot of fun to watch this week. One of my favorite games, and we'll preview that in a couple of days. At 15 and 16, we have Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. Two teams that are both up a spot, taking over for LSU that lost. Again, they did their job against FCS teams. They get rewarded for it. At 17, Kansas State, apologize. They're up a spot as well. Again, they do their job against a weaker opponent. And then LSU slots in at 18. The first 0-1 team on this list. They're down 5 spots. I like that they didn't get punished too much for going up against a good USC team. I might have dropped them down 1 or 2 more spots, but that's just personal preference. I think this is a good ranking for them. Again, their defense also looked much improved going up against a solid USC offense. There's a lot of things to like about this Tigers team. I think people are overreacting about them a little bit. They should still be really good, and they still have a chance to make the new 12-team college football playoff. At 19 is Kansas. Again, they did their job against a team that they should have beat, which is not always as easy as it seems. Then you have Arizona. Flashy. I like this team a lot. They slot in at 20, up 1 spot. I like what they did against New Mexico. It took a little bit for them to get going, but they eventually got it going, and I like where they are heading. Iowa at number 21, up 4 spots. 40 points for Iowa is impressive. It's super cool to see an Iowa team that is able to score points. Now, they got a little bit lucky. They weren't super careful with the ball, but they didn't end up turning it over. They can't do quite these exact same thing against a team with a better defense, but it's encouraging to see that they're able to move the ball on offense for the first time in really 3 or 4 seasons. So everything's trending up for Iowa right now. Then we have two teams that were out of the top 25. Louisville, who I talked about as one of those successful transfer portal teams. I really, really like Louisville this year. I predicted them to make the college football playoffs. They end up winning 62-0, a very impressive win against a team that, again, they should have beaten, but they beat them into oblivion. They did their job. I want to see if they can keep it up. At 23, Georgia Tech, obviously going over to Dublin, beating up on Florida State. We talked about that a couple of times. Then they take care of business against a solid group of 5 team in Georgia, in Georgia State, right? Battle of Atlanta. These two teams, the Sun Belt is one of those conferences that's just really solid. You know, you go up and down the conference. There's a couple of stinkers, but the top's really good. App State, JMU, Troy's been at the top the last couple years. You know, these teams are really solid. And then the middle of it, also filled with teams. You know, the Sun Belt had the most teams that made the bowl that made bowl games last year. They had, I believe, 10 teams make bowl games, which is kind of insane. It's a very solid conference. They did their job against two teams that aren't really easy opponents. Then NC State stays put at 24. They didn't quite win as convincingly as you'd like to see them win, but they did get the win. I like that they didn't get punished for it, especially with a bunch of other teams losing. And finally, wrapping up the top 25, Clemson is in that 25 spot. Clemson is a team that needs to really take a long, hard look at itself in the mirror, and maybe it's just because it was Georgia, but I'm blaming the fact that he doesn't use the transfer portal. Dabo Swinney refuses to use the transfer portal. They need to grow up and stop being against change. You're going to get left behind, and we're already starting to see it happen. There's going to be some tough decisions this upcoming season for Clemson. Is it time to move on from Dabo if Dabo cannot adapt to the transfer portal? That is a huge part of the game now. We'll see what happens, though. A couple of guys that are receiving votes. The first team out, Texas A&M. They played a good team. I don't mind them being just outside of it. Boston College, after their win over Florida State, is 27th. Then we have a couple of group of 5 teams in here. Boise State, Memphis, Tulane, App State, UNLV. This is going to be a fun college football season. We'll keep an eye on it as the times continue to change. I like this list a lot. You know, a lot of times they don't do a lot of movement after week 1, and that's because they don't want to overreact to it. But I think they did a good job of moving where things could be moved and staying pat where they shouldn't have overreacted. I like this list a lot, but let me know what you think of the top 25. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to finish off our show talking a little bit about Trent Williams. He signed a massive new contract just about 15 minutes before we went live. We'll talk about that contract. We'll talk about where the 49ers stand now that they officially have the whole crew back together. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over the AP Top 25 poll that came out earlier today. Talked about which teams I agreed with, which ones I did not. In this segment, we're going to finish off our show talking about Trent Williams, the 49ers, and where they stand now. A new deal has been signed, officially breaking news as of 15 minutes before we went live, so just about an hour ago now. We're going to talk about all of that and more in just a second, but before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you are on YouTube, you can do the same thing with a super chat as well. If you have a burning question about sports, anything at all you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments, throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. For example, Anthony from our last segment asked, what's my prediction for the rest of the year for the Hurricanes? Do I think they go undefeated and win the ACC? I think they definitely win the ACC. As far as going undefeated, I'm not sure if I'd go that far, but they looked really good. They're arguably a top 10 team for me. The ACC is theirs to lose. The ACC runs through them. Anything could happen. It's football. Bounce of the ball goes one direction. They lose. It goes the other way. They win. I do think they definitely win the ACC, but as far as going undefeated, I don't know. I'd say finishing 11 and finishing 11-1. You think Miami wins the rest of their schedule and wins the ACC, or a one's loss in the semifinal game? Well, I'm not counting the playoffs as part of the record. I say they go like 11-1 in the regular season. Maybe they take a close loss to a Louisville later on. I'm not sure if they're playing them. I don't have the schedule up in front of me, but the ACC definitely runs through them, and I think they as far as them making the semifinal, we're gonna have to watch them again. I don't want to overreact too much to week one, but there are a lot of signs right now. I think they definitely look like one of those teams that could compete for a national championship right now. But like I was saying, we are getting into Trent Williams and the 49ers. When I was preparing for this segment, the only news was that Trent Williams has returned to the field for the 49ers. Trent Williams is one of the most important players in football. He plays offensive line, so it's not going to show up in the stat sheet, but his ability to be as athletic as he is, protect the quarterback, get out in the run game, also for the mental part of that team. It's a tough grind of a season. And what Trent Williams is able to bring to the team as a leader, both on and off the field, is huge for that 49ers organization. In the games that they played without him last season, they looked like a completely lost team. You remember back to that Minnesota game that they ended up losing, a team that they were absolutely better than and shouldn't have any business losing to. They didn't have Trent Williams. And now that Trent Williams is on this team, he's officially back, I feel a lot more comfortable about the direction that they're heading in. Now, he ends up signing an extension, moves money around. He's going to be making $27 million this year. That is the most by any offensive lineman. The restructured deal is worth 3 years, $82.6 million, $25 million signing bonus, and $48 due at signing. That is a big contract for a big man. Now, we know he was holding out, and he's just trying to get a little more money. He's a guy that's very vocal, trying to get some of his fines paid for. They've guaranteed the first 2 years of his deal. He's also a little older, again, has had a little bit of injury history, but when he is out on the field, he is potentially the best player in football, right? What he adds to that 49ers team, I think he's definitely the best player on the 49ers by a pretty wide margin. I think, again, you take a look at the games where he's there and he isn't, it's just insane, the difference. Now, when we're talking about football games, they thought Trent Williams wasn't going to be there for week 1 against the Jets, and they also thought Brandon Ayuk wasn't going to be there for the Jets. Both of them get figured out. It was a very, very loud offseason for the 49ers. It finally gets quieted down kind of at the 11th hour, the last minute. The clock was about to tick past where they could go. But these guys are going to be ready, and it should be a really fun Monday night game. We'll do a preview for that later on in the week. But this again, it's just a huge deal for the Niners. Another deal that we kind of glossed over earlier on when it broke, Cam Hayward signing with the Steelers. We talk about that Steelers defense. We bring up TJ Watt. We bring up Minka Fitzpatrick. We bring up all these stars that are all over the defense. But Cam Hayward has kind of been that rock for that defense at defensive tackle. He's been there for as long as I can remember. He's, again, kind of like Trent Williams for the 49ers, a mental, spiritual leader for this team. And that is one of the most important things to have. I think as much as people give Mike Tomlin credit for them winning for going over 500 every single year of his tenure, a lot of that has to do with the guys that lead. You had Troy Polamalu at the beginning, and it was easier when you had the killer bees. But in these leaner years offensively, you still have Cam Hayward being the vocal leader as a teammate, and him being there, I think, makes a huge difference for the Steelers team. Much like Trent Williams being there for the 49ers team, these two teams wouldn't be complete without those two guys there, and it's great that they both got deals done. Veterans getting 3-year deals, extensions to keep that team together. It's one of the more undervalued parts. Both of these guys are really good, so they're not like one of those they're not like a backup quarterback that's necessary for that role. They're still very important on the field as well as off the field, but I think that off the field part needs to get highlighted just a little bit more. But let me know what you think. Is Trent Williams' return really as important as I'm making it out to be? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Go ahead and leave that in the comment. We're going to end our show here. Tomorrow, we will be going over a bunch of all the breaking news that comes out of sports in the next 24 hours, as well as previewing the NFL awards, maybe some MLB awards as well. So come back tomorrow for that. You've been listening to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Again, I appreciate you all sticking around. We'll be back same place, same time tomorrow. You all have a good one. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I'm trying to feel like it's gonna be a bad day. I'm tired of shit. The coffee ain't hit yet, damn it.